Program. For our next story, we move over to Europe, where Russia said it has captured Ukrainian villages in 3 separate areas on the front line, expanding its summer offensive. This is despite US's constant calls to end the Russia-Ukraine war. In a statement, the Russian Defense Ministry said its forces had liberated the settlements of Popov Yar in the eastern Donetsk region, Defiant in the northeast of Kharkiv, and the Kamiansky in the southern Zaporizhzhia region. Kamiansky, on the banks of the Dnipro River, was home to around 2,000 people before the conflict. The Russian military accelerated its advances for a 3rd consecutive month in June. US President Donald Trump has given Moscow 50 days from Monday to reach a peace deal or face bruising sanctions, but Ukraine says the Kremlin has no interest in ending the fighting and will press on regardless. We're now joined by Patrick Payne, who is a strategic and international affairs expert. He joins us live from the Indian capital of New Delhi. Thank you very much, Patrick, for joining us on the programme. What are your thoughts on this escalating Russian aggression that they have said that they have liberated another 3 villages in Ukraine, while also facing a backdrop of diplomatic efforts in ending this war, a war that Russia says it wants to end. However, its actions, some would say, would not say so.
First and foremost, this war has been going on from 2014, and probably Russia is fighting against the entire strength of NATO. So if the war is going on, then both sides are equally responsible. Both sides here would mean Russia and NATO together. Secondly, I think the possibility of the war ending soon is highly unlikely, given the kind of arming of Ukraine that has been done by NATO, and it's being continued even till date by United States. President Trump has made it very clear that now from henceforth, United States will not directly be giving weapon systems to Ukraine, but it is the NATO countries of Europe who would be buying it from United States and then sending it to Ukraine. So on one hand, when Ukraine is being armed by United States and other NATO members, it is highly unlikely that Russia on its part will end the war. And it appears that after taking care of the first 4 districts with
there with Pathikrit. Hopefully he joins us once again soon. We are discussing the ongoing developments in the Russia-Ukraine war, where Russia has claimed to have captured 3 separate areas on the front line. We're once again joined by Pathikrit Payne to discuss this further. Pathikrit, if your camera works, it would be brilliant if you could switch it on for us so we could see you. I want to once again get into this ongoing pushed on military offensive by Russia. Russia also says it wants peace. What significance does this 50-day deadline, which Donald Trump has issued to Moscow, what risks does it have if a peace deal is not met in that time?
Well, first and foremost, my apologies for the disruptions in between. See, let me put it this way. The war is not going to end. Trump thought that he would be able to finish the war in probably in a day's time. It's been several months now. It has not ended, and it's not going to end. Russia is literally fighting this war since 2014, when the expansion of NATO reached its culmination to Ukraine, and before that in Georgia. So if you look at it this way, Russia has been fighting against the entire might of the NATO countries. Even now, United States president has made it clear that United States will sell the weapon system to the rest of the NATO members in Europe, who would then send it to Ukraine, which means the arming and deployment of critical weapon systems to Ukraine in Ukraine continues. And therefore, Russia, for its own safety, it appears, will continue to work on developing a buffer zone after having taken care of the first 4 provinces in Eastern Europe.
I think Russia has also been helped by its allies as well. It's been using Iranian-made missiles, along with physical troops that have been sent by North Korea, over 10,000 of them. So Russia has not been fighting this war on its own in the same way that you have put it. What do you think that these sanctions that Donald Trump promises to impose on its allies like China, like India, will have on Russia's economy if they do come into force?
Well, let me say it. See, the Russians brought in the North Koreans much later. The NATO has been fighting it for a long time with all the weapon systems. Secondly, I don't think this 50-day, ultimatum and the threats of sanctions on India and China. I can't comment about China, but I don't think it's going to impact India at all. First and foremost, it's not going to impact Russia because Russia has minimal and nominal trade today with the United States. Secondly, when it comes to India, India has no option but to keep on taking oil from Russia. Where will a country like India with such a huge population take oil from if every other country is under sanctions from the United States? They put sanctions on Iran, they have put sanctions on Venezuela, and now they have already put a lot of sanctions on Russia. So I think what would happen is that they will put in sanctions, but eventually there will be certain exemptions and concessions because I do not think today the NATO members who are also part of European Union can afford not to have a trade deal with India. I do not think United States would prefer a situation where they impose 100% tariff and stop completely all kind of trade with India because that's not something the American economy or the American companies will consider either. So this whole threat of sanctions and increasing tariff has its own limitations, has its own marginal utility. The utility is now becoming diminishing, and I think it's important for United States and other NATO members to understand, consider, and comprehend that if they genuinely want to end the conflict, if they genuinely want peace in the world, they have to look for other options apart from these threats of tariffs and threats of sanctions.
Pathakrit, I want to just get into the narrative here that Vladimir Putin says that he wants peace, yet he is launching aerial strikes into Ukraine on an almost daily basis, and yet tells the US president that he wants this war to end. What do you think about Vladimir Putin's statements here? Donald Trump has voiced criticism with him. Do you think Donald Trump's patience is wearing too thin with the Russian president?
Oh, well, I don't think Russia will be running the country. I mean, Putin will be running the country based on whether Trump gets happy or not. What Russia is doing right now is exactly what America would have done if Russia had wanted to set up a base in Canada. And they had done exactly the same thing once the Cuban crisis happened in 1962 when Soviet Union wanted to set up a missile base in Cuba. So frankly, the Cold War ended and with that Soviet Union disintegrated, the Warsaw Pact ended. The logical conclusion, as has been mentioned by the Foreign External Affairs Minister of India as well, that NATO should have been dismantled. The expansion of NATO eastward into Europe and rest will continue to create problems. So merely pinning the blame on Russia will not help. If you want to say that Russia is expansionist and they're targeting Ukraine because they want to siege Ukraine, well, in that case, they could have taken over Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan very easily. Nobody would have blinked an eye because those are not part of Europe either. But they haven't done so. The whole of Central Asia, which was part of Soviet Union, remains as independent as they can be. So if there is a problem with Ukraine, it's because somebody wanted Ukraine to fight the war, the proxy war on behalf of NATO. And that is exactly what is happening. So if they are serious about ending the war, NATO must be dismantled. If they're serious about ending the war, they must give a pledge that eastward expansion of NATO will not happen. So this is a game that is going on for a long time. Projecting Putin as the villain is exactly what they did with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya or Saddam Hussein in Iraq.
Why should NATO be dismantled to end this war? Why did you say NATO should be dismantled to end this war, Pathakrit? I'm confused.
I am saying NATO must be dismantled. The expansion of NATO is one of the most important and critical reasons for this war to continue. Till the time the hegemony of the NATO continues, and if they continue to expand eastward, if they want to set up bases in countries like Ukraine, then invariably the conflict will continue. Because if Russia had wanted to set up a base in Canada, US would have reacted the same way as Russia is reacting because NATO is arming Ukraine to fight Russia. And this has not started in 2022. This war started in 2014 once the regime change was done in Ukraine by the entire regime change machinery led by Victor Nuland and John McCain. So we have a history behind that, and that cannot be discounted. So NATO's expansion today, NATO Secretary General even threatened India with 100% tariff.
Okay.
So who is NATO Secretary General to threaten India? India will do whatever is necessary for its own foreign policy and for its own country's welfare. They cannot. Europe must come out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problem, but the world's problems are not Europe's problem. This is the issue that has been highlighted by the External Affairs Minister of India time and again. So I think these kind of threats, the caricature or projecting Putin as a villain and the rest as holy saints, that's not going to work. Both sides equally responsible for this conflict, and this conflict will only end if NATO is dismantled or NATO takes a pledge that their eastward expansion will not continue anymore. Back to you.
Patrick Payne, you are staying with us to discuss further updates from this Russia-Ukraine conflict. President Zelensky has appointed a deputy prime minister,